Now that we know we're able to use this new module that we've included in our project, let's go ahead and round off the validation of the other API calls. So if we head to the post API call, we can now just do a bunch of copy and paste to get the same result that we got from our get user call. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the code above, and let's, for the sake of this example, assume that we are going to expect 4 parameters when creating a user. One is going to be the first name. We are also going to expect the last name. We're going to expect an email address. And last but not least, every user is going to have a career. So again, we can specify what we'd like the error message to be. First name is required. In this case, I'm not going to check that it's alphanumeric or anything. I'll keep it simple and just say that the first name is required. And similar for the last name, we can just say that last name is required. For the email address, let's validate 2 things. So email address is required and must be a valid email. So we're going to check that it's not empty, but we're also going to check that it is an email address, and we can use this isEmail function. And for career, let's assume that in this universe there are only 3 possible careers. So those 3 possible careers can be encapsulated by this isIn function, and we just pass it an array. You can either be a student, a teacher, or a professor. So I'll say the career must be either student, teacher, or professor. Okay, so we've defined our validation rules. We are going to, once again, assign it to this errors variable if we do find any errors. And instead of outputting just the first error, I'll take away the 0 so that we're actually outputting any errors that we happen to find. So we see that our nodemon is still running and everything looks like it's going all right. And if I head to one of my older post calls, I can delete everything in the request body so that we're actually not passing anything in. And if I do that and submit the request, we now see that we get a status failure and first name, last name, email is all required. So this email part comes out twice, and that's something that we can fix in a future lesson. But let me go ahead and actually show you, because this is more interesting, what happens as you start completing some of these values. So as I type first name Jim, we'll see that that one goes away. As I type last name test, we'll see that that one goes away. If I type email address and I put Jim@test, but I omit the .com part, we'll see that we get this error that email address is required and must be a valid email. So it knows that this format is not the correct format of an email address. If I add the .com, we'll see that that error goes away. And if I add career, let's say I put no value, nope, it's not going to take it. If I put career as an animal, again, career must be either student, teacher, or professor. And finally, if I pass in a valid value, we get our familiar success response. So we know that our post API call is working as expected and has a few more validation checks in place to make sure that the data coming in is actually good. So in terms of rounding off the other 2 API calls, I'll keep it simple and just ensure that when you're updating a user, we have a valid ID. And similarly, when you're deleting a user, you have a valid ID. So I'll keep it basic and I'll leave it at that. As I was mentioning, or as I should mention, there are a lot of different validation frameworks that are out there. If you just Google, for example, Restify validation, you don't have to use this particular framework. A whole bunch will actually come up, and they're all probably have their pros and cons. I picked this one because it's a pretty simple one for the example that we're doing, but I also found this other one that's called Node Restify Validation, and this one is more explicit in the sense that it lists out the validation functions that are available to you. So this one actually doesn't do that, which is the one that we picked. But I've been trying ones from this giant list, and from what I can see, most of them seem to be available. So feel free to play around with whatever validation framework that you want, and you'll probably find one that you like more than this one. This is just the one that we've used for the course because it's an easy example to get your hands kind of dirty. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.